everybody, it's Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between writers. And you know, I'm on a little streak here, I must say. You know, if you've listened to the show, you know I talk to a lot of novelists, and probably the preponderance of those novelists fall into the mystery, thriller, suspense category. But this is a show for writers of all types, as I say in every intro. So I strive and hope to always branch out and talk to different types of writers, be they journalists, nonfiction, what have you. And today I had the absolute thrill and pleasure of speaking to a poet. I spoke today to Erin Hoover, who teaches creative writing and literary editing as an assistant professor of English at Tennessee Tech. And her debut collection, Barnburner, actually won the Florida Book Award for poetry. So she's been writing poetry, what did she say, ever since I guess maybe it was high school, where she had a teacher who kind of introduced poetry to her, and it kind of was that seminal moment that a lot of writers have, or that person that a lot of writers have, who just changed how they viewed creativity. And it was kind of interesting how she put it. You know, she had always liked to write, but when she realized, or when she kind of started to write poetry through school, she kind of found that it was the organic way to best express what she was feeling, what she was thinking, the themes that she was trying to convey in writing was through the structure of poetry. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. So we get into a lot about that, a lot about her background, and then of course, like, you know, what are the realities of writing poetry or writing anything, and, you know, vis-a-vis the publishing world and getting the book out there, booking tours, and you know, all of that kind of stuff. So her I think it's her third book is out on October 20th, and it's called No Spare People. So it's actually her second collection. So that's very exciting, and it was interesting to hear about how you approach a collection. How do you decide not only what poems to put into a collection, but like an album, what order do these go in to convey the pace and the stylistic choices and the emotion that you wanted to convey. So I thought that was fascinating. So very interesting to talk to. Kind of throughout the conversation, I'm like, I should talk to more poets, because this is a fascinating world to me. She was illuminating about kind of that lifestyle. So I really enjoyed it, and I think you're going to like this one too. This is my conversation with Erin Hoover.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
Nice to meet you. And thank you for rescheduling. I'm actually headed. You're in the South, right?
Yeah, I'm in Tennessee.
Yeah, I'm headed down to Louisiana on Wednesday.
Oh, yeah. Is it for a author related thing?
It's a family. Yeah, my son is a freshman at LSU.
Oh, okay.
He wanted. I'm in Colorado, so he wanted warmer weather, or hot and insufferable weather, I guess. And he wanted to just be part of a big SEC school because he's studying athletic training, and they have great programs like that. So,
wow.
But my agent is actually in New Orleans, so I'll have a chance to have coffee with her. So that's exciting as well.
Yeah, I love New Orleans. I'm from the Northeast, so I'm always, headed back up to New York or Philly, or,
Where in the Northeast are you from? Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
So Rust Belt.
Yeah.
So what was growing up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania like? And you could be honest.
Yeah. Well, when I was growing up there, I thought thought it was really boring and I really wanted to leave, and I didn't see a future for myself there at all.
Mm.
I also, the town where I'm from is actually north of Harrisburg. It's like all along the Susquehanna River, and it's a pretty depressed place. So I just want to get out of there. But now I think that I look back on it and I value it a little more.
Okay. So
the slowness of it.
Yeah, well, for sure.
I mean, it's slow here in Tennessee. Don't get me wrong.
Well, I think it's funny, as we all age, I think there is some, for, I guess maybe just speaking for myself, there's a craving for a slower pace. And, I moved, I've lived in a bunch of places, but when I moved to Colorado almost 30 years ago, that was slow for me. And I'm like, this is nice. And now I'm like, it's a little fast for me. What's slower now? But It's like, do you think when you were growing up in Harrisburg or the outskirts of Harrisburg, was that amongst your friends and stuff, was that kind of a general sentiment, kind of the old, almost the movie cliche of like, oh, you got to get out of here. Don't get stuck here.
Yeah. I don't know if I was talking about that with another friend who actually grew up in Wisconsin. She was saying the similar, her name is Rebecca Lehman, a poet. She was saying, she couldn't wait to leave Wisconsin. And it's like, did the movies create that in us, or did they just reflect our reality? I don't know. But that always, that really resonated for me when I was younger. And almost none of my high school friends live there.
Oh, that's interesting, because normally, the typical case is what, 50%. I grew up in Los Angeles, and whenever I go back to visit, which is very infrequent, there's got to be at least 50% of the graduating class still lives in that greater area, but obviously LA.
Yeah, well, my brother still lives there.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
So were you, just curious in kind of your upbringing there, were you writing at all as a kid? Did you express interest in that? Was that something that you thought maybe your location would be a barrier to breaking through on?
Yeah. Well, I had no awareness of anything related to how to be a professional writer, or, that was just like not even in my vocabulary.
Right.
So I think that I probably began writing because I grew up in the country and I spent a lot of time by myself. And when you're a kid I had a younger brother, but I used to play by myself, and he was younger anyway. But, I had a vivid imagination. I think kids who are mostly spending time by themselves outdoors, stuff like that, would get we're very imaginative. So, even when I was really young, I was trying to write stories. And then when I was in high school, I had a teacher who I realize now was a poet. She had published poetry, but she was also a high school English teacher.
But she didn't really say that to the class?
She didn't say that. We just studied poetry all year long. It was like 10th grade.
That's so interesting.
Her name is Dorothy Brown, and I've tried, I think she may have passed because I've tried to find her. But she gave me the first poetry assignment that I did. And I'd never felt what I felt writing that. Like I felt it seemed like such an achievement, and that what I had written matched something important in my mind that I wanted to say. And I felt like, oh, wow. So I could say this in poetry. Somehow I couldn't say it in prose, or I couldn't say it in painting, or just in regular speech or whatever. It was like poetry was the thing.
That was how your brain kind of processed your thoughts and emotions.
I think so.
Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it?
I think people have different dispositions when they're creative people in terms of what they gravitate to. I always liked music too, but so I do have an ear. Okay. I can hear meter in poetry, but I don't have an ear for pitch. Right. So I played the violin really horribly, right. So that was not going to be my thing, but something with poetry combined storytelling and I think sound in a way that I like.
Yeah. It's so weird how creative people, the manifestation of their creativity has to find that person's talent as well. Because I'm like you, like I love music and I have an ear for music, but I couldn't, write music to save my life. And it's even interesting, like I recently injured my hand, so I had my right hand bandaged completely for 2 weeks, so I couldn't type. And so I was writing and I was trying to just use dictation. And I realized how I speak is totally different than how I write. The words are structured totally differently when they're being processed through my fingers. And that was a complete revelation to me. And so it is kind of like how there is something about, your hands being the musical instrument that the voice, needs to be filtered through in a way, or the brain needs to be filtered through. So like you with poetry. Now, when you first got that first assignment from Mrs. Brown, did that, and you started to learn poetry, did she teach it, and did you learn it differently than what you maybe had a preconceived notion about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I really had a preconceived notion about it, aside from the one that a lot of students come to me now with, which is nursery rhyme.
Like it has to be right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like the center justified poem that has an A-B rhyme scheme. I think that's probably what I thought it was.
Yeah.
Like poster there.
As opposed to maybe just being poetry is what your brain makes of it in a way.
Yeah. Well, I think with writing poems, it's like you're trying to find the right form for the thoughts that you're having.
Right.
So sometimes we write in receipt forms, sonnets or whatever. Right. Sometimes we're writing free verse and we're making up a pattern.
Yeah, and even with prose, I find it fascinating because even with prose, like when I'm writing a novel, I do need to hear that percussive rhythm. And when I'm writing a very thrilling passage, I mean, I read a ton, most of my writing fragments, a fragmented sentence is one paragraph, that kind of a thing, because I can hear it. I can see the pace, and it might be good or bad, but that's just how it comes out of me. There is so much about rhythm in writing, regardless of what it is. And it's so easy to spot it when that rhythm is maybe not quite hitting.
Yeah, I when I read a passage of prose that I really like a prose writer that this is like, someone who's not a living writer, but Carson McCullers is like reading her books, like passages that I like. I'm like, there's a sound element. There's usually a syntax element that I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with that.
Totally. And, Cormac McCarthy's the same way. Like,
oh yeah,
you sit here and you read books and your eyes immediately start almost searching for passages you can skip because your brain is telling you to absorb the story. And you read somebody like Cormac McCarthy, and I think poetry falls into the same realm. You're forced to read every word because of how it's structured and because of how it's presented. If you try to skim it, it won't make any sense. And it's hard. Sometimes it's hard enough to read when you are focusing word for word, but when you do, it's exponential, the power of it.
Yeah.
And I think poetry is the same way. You're like, this one word was given a lot of thought, and not only for what the meaning it conveys, but how many syllables it has, the inherent rhythm, or maybe the dissonance of that word when spoken in someone's mind. How much time do you spend getting the words out and reflecting your emotions and and what you want to convey versus the actual structure of it?
Yeah. So I was thinking too about when I first started writing. I started writing poetry on a computer. I had a computer at that time, which enabled me, I think, from the outset to be editing at the same time I was composing. So I do think that if I had started as a writer writing longhand, and sort of getting out a draft and then revising it. I mean, I do multiple rounds of revision, but I also think that I'm sort of moving things around and playing with them as I'm writing. And for me, like, I think poetry, it has this added dimension of the sentence and the syntax of the sentence being contrasted or either going with or against the line break. So I don't know how nerdy you want me to get with that, but
nerd out as much as you want.
I mean, that's really what fascinated me about it, is being able to give certain words emphasis, like just all the tools I had at my disposal for that. So I think it's kind of like, you know, how you would maybe anything creative is this way, whether you're writing a song or working on a painting or whatever, you're doing the background stuff, you're getting the basics, like the frame there. And then I kind of, I tweak and I move around and I try to perfect, so that the work is what I want it to be. Sometimes I do a major overhaul, right? It's like almost like painting over the whole canvas or rewinding the song and just re-recording it. But yeah, it's like, normally I have an idea and I mean, I'm lucky enough to still have these moments of inspiration, right? Where I have to write something down and I sort of get that down. And I mean, I write also pretty slowly. So I might write something and then come back to it in a month and then come back to it again a couple more months. The longest poem that well, I mean, not long in terms of length, but I have a poem in my first book that it took me 10 years to write.
Oh, wow.
You know, just from version number 1 to version number 78 or whatever. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's almost something mathematical about writing in a problem solving aspect when you kind of are looking at your own work and feeling like, okay, the puzzle hasn't quite been solved because things aren't clicking in my mind. The problem is how you solve a solution to a problem could be totally different than how a reader absorbs it. So, for example, writing thriller novels, I get to a point where I'm like, this is the best version of it that it can be based on my limited perspective because I'm the only one who's seen this. And then I give it to my agent. We give it to my editor. We get all the feedback, massive revisions, and they're almost always great ideas that I was too close to see. How does that contrast with, because this is a very naive question, how does that contrast with poetry, which I look at as being perhaps much more personal and much more harder for there to be a general consensus about whether an audience receives it well or not, than something like a genre piece?
Yeah. It's like part of me wants to agree with that and part of me wants to not agree with it because I think, well, no, I do think that, I do think that it can be hard to have a definitive answer about whether or not a poem is working or not. It's like one person says, okay, I see it working this way. And another person says, no, I see it working this other way. Right. One of my mentors at one point said something like you have to be careful about ambiguity or multiple ideas about what a specific poem could mean. I mean, you want to at least have the sense that the author definitely has something that they are trying to get across. That
like if somebody asks you, hey, what's this poem about?
Yeah, the author really should be able to say. I don't know if my mentor made up this metaphor or not, but something like if you're looking at, it's like you're looking at a body of water, and the floor is there. You know, there's a floor to the lake or whatever, the ocean. You can't necessarily see it, but you know it's there. You want to believe when you're reading that there's a floor there, that there's something grounded about what you're reading, and that the author knows what they're doing. But I mean, now I don't show my poetry to people as much as I once did before I publish it, because I think I have internalized a critical eye, for editing. But some poems that I'm having real trouble with, I do share with friends of mine who are other writers, so they can maybe help me out. For that reason that you're saying, you can be too close to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would think it's very, and a lot of it is knowing who to talk to,
Sure.
because, and that takes years, I think, to develop a kind of trust where you're like, this person has always steered me right. So
Yeah.
just going back a little bit, what did you end up studying in school?
Yeah. Okay. So this is the time when I don't know about you, but when I was applying to colleges, you went to a bookstore and you got this like big book that had like a list of all the colleges cross-referenced with all the majors they offered and their addresses. You could write to them and see if they would send you a packet.
Right.
So I did that. I forget what that book is even called. Peterson's. I don't know what it's called, but went and looked at that, looked up creative writing. And there were schools at the time who really had BA programs in creative writing. Not that many anyway. I remember one of them.
Or the MFA kind of a thing. Yeah.
Well, like I was thinking BA. I was like, yeah, maybe I've been at MIT. And then I was like, what? I found out other stuff about MIT. And I was like, Erin, you really do not belong at MIT. I probably could not have gotten in. But one of the schools that I saw was Sarah Lawrence College in New York. And I had an infatuation with New York anyway, being from kind of central Pennsylvania. It just seemed really like, oh, this, I go here, it's going to change my life. It's going to be amazing. I'll probably, this vision of yourself, like just hanging out with editors and just other writers. And you just
and it's not that far. You still
like Andy Warhol is there. Like, I don't know.
Right.
So I got a number of scholarships to go there, and I went there to Sarah Lawrence, and it was like a whole different world for me because I don't know how much you know about that school, but there's a
Hudson Valley area.
Yeah.
I know it's very. I went to school in New York as well, upstate New York. So.
Oh yeah. But I mean, these were kids who went to equestrian camps and like spent their summers in Europe, and I was spending my summer like working at Subway, like making sandwiches. So I was just like it was very different for me.
Yeah.
I had a lot of access to famous poets, but I didn't know how to even talk to them. Like, what do you say? The poet says you can come to my office hours, and you go and you're like, I would just sit there. Like, I didn't know like what questions to ask. I think it's a shame. I wish I could go back and do it again.
Yeah.
Like maybe as a mid-40s woman, I'll go back to undergrad.
Right. Yeah. Now you have all the questions, that you want to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
so what kind of degree did you graduate with then?
It's a degree in liberal arts.
Okay.
But I don't know what they do at Sarah Lawrence now, but at that time, everyone got a BA in liberal arts.
Got it.
So, I took like filmmaking and photography and bunch of feminist lit courses, like, I mean, probably if I went back in time, I would take all exactly the same courses.
Right. Yeah. No, you made college the way that it was supposed to be for you. Which is great.
Yeah. And then when I graduated, I had no idea what to do, which I think happens to a lot of students who are studying to be writers. It's like, no one really talks to you about how they're very focused on teaching you the craft. Right. There's not a lot of focus in how to publish or how to make a career. Or I remember I thought any other career, such as I ended up getting a job in marketing, and I thought I had failed. I'm like, oh, I work in marketing. That's like not real writing or whatever. But of course, like most writers do. Like,
well, yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
If they had taught about the realities of publishing, nobody would be taken to classes because the publishing industry is a nightmare. I mean, maybe not a nightmare. Maybe that's harsh. It's just a very difficult profession to say, I'm going to become a full-time writer. In fact, if you actually have that aspiration, it's probably ill-conceived. as opposed to working in marketing, working at Subway, and still doing what you love, using your passion to find a way to do the things that you really care about while knowing the reality of, I got to pay my rent.
Yeah, I just think I don't know. I don't know if I feel misled exactly. I do think that like I remember asking very direct questions about how to publish. I think people just didn't know what to tell me. I also think that you can know, now that I'm a professor, like you can know a student is talented, but like you can't assure them of success. You know, they want to tell, I get this direct question, like, you know, Dr. Hoover, do you think I should keep writing? Do you think I have what it takes? And it's like, boy, that's $1 million question.
Right.
You know, it depends what you do next, and then what you do after that, and what you get set up to do, you know, 10 steps from now.
Right. Right. And there's no, you know, there's plenty of evidence, and I'm part of that body of evidence, that you can keep writing while having a full-time job for decades. And so when somebody says, should I keep writing? It's like, well, why wouldn't you? Is it a passion of yours? And if so, you'll figure out a way to make time to do that.
Right.
But the reality of the publishing industry and being commercially viable is a struggle, even, you know, especially for genre writers with popular fiction. When you get, the more and more niche you get as a poet, that's got to be a struggle as well. Like, how deep is this market? What's the reality of, you know, selling, you know, 1,000 copies of a book? I got to assume it's tough.
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, I give a little talk sometimes on poetry publishing, just because people want to know, how did you get your book published? How does that work? What happens when your book gets accepted? Like these perennial questions. And, you know, I found out at some stage that like the typical print run for a poetry collection is 600 copies if you're doing a print run. Now there's more like print on demand things, but 600, you know, like, okay, so I imagine my book and maybe if I'm lucky, 600 people reading it. I mean, I think it's more people read a book of poetry per copy, honestly, than the person who initially buys it. Yeah. Or the books sit on a shelf and nobody ever reads it.
Right.
Because it was a gift or something that they bought out of a sense of being ambitious and wanting to be a person who bought a poetry collection. I mean, I relate, I get it.
Yeah. Right.
But, you know, occasionally I have these things that happen. Like, I got an Instagram message the other day from someone in Portland, Oregon, who said that she was looking at the books at Goodwill and she saw a copy of Animal Farm, and my first book, Barnburner, was shoved into Animal Farm, and that like it was, you know, a book shoved into another book, and she said that the irony of that kind of like got her. She thought that was cool. So she bought it, and she said, I went home and I read it on my porch in one sitting. She said, I really, really, she really liked the book, and she said that you know, she'd been a writer, but she hadn't written in a while. She said, but your book found me, and I needed your book. So maybe I'll write something and someone else will find it and it'll mean something to them. And I was like, okay, you know, thank you. You've now kept me going for like,
right. You've made this all worthwhile.
Like you think that like, you know, I gave you something. Well, you're giving me something pretty powerful.
No, it's crazy. And like, just to have somebody to reach out, like, make that effort to find you online, contact you, is wonderful. And when it happens, it's like tremendously rewarding, because you do feel like, wow, something that just came out of my weird brain affected this person who I don't even know, who's thousands of miles away. And there's something very magical about that, even if it's not, you know, even if you're not getting 10,000 of those emails, just having that one is a little mystical.
It was really cool. I don't think she realizes how cool it was. There was and I think I wrote back something like, you know, you have to give yourself permission to write bad poems, which was something I said to myself after my first book. You know, I'm like, all right, so I have to write the second book. Well, not like I have to. I mean, the world would still turn if I didn't write it. We would all survive. But, you
I
know,
know that might have been the key to humanity.
oh, well, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to write about, because after you have your first book, I think some other people run into this. It can be hard to write a second book because you feel like you've just spent all the currency you have or something. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to write some poems. They might be bad, I'm going to sit down and write another bad poem. But like, they weren't bad, or like I could revise them or whatever. So it was fine. I wrote a second book.
And it's so hard to even define bad, I think.
Right.
Because you go back and look at your earlier stuff and you might be like, oh. But that doesn't mean it's bad. That's where you were at that time. And we're constantly evolving and changing. And then how we think and how we process and how we output is an evolution for sure. I mean, I know I can't even, I'll ever go back and read any of my books, ever. Because you've read them so many times, you're sick of them anyway.
Yeah.
But sometimes when you have to go do a reading, so I'm looking for a passage and I'm like, oh, God, I got to look at this stupid thing. It's weird. And then once in a while you're like, oh, this part's actually quite good. I don't even remember this part. But I must have.
Yeah, no, I've had that. I've also had the feeling where I read something I've written later. I'm like, good for you, Erin.
Right.
Like that was pretty good. I'm like, I get why I wrote that way.
Yeah, totally. And it also depends on how personal you are with it too, because sometimes in some periods of your life, your writing is exceptionally personal, and you're like, I can't believe I announced this to the world. I don't know if I would have done that now, but that was the moment that I was in. I was in a really bad moment, and it surprises you when you go back and you see that sometimes.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true for me and my work. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is, even though I think poets resist the idea that their work is just pure autobiography. Because I'll get questions like, did this really happen? There's a poem set at a restaurant. What restaurant was it? I'm like, let's like
give me credit for my imagination.
Yeah, like I actually have some craft. Thank you.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that things aren't based or around real people and places. And, you have to draw from somewhere.
Right.
So, reading one's old work, or for me, when I do it, it's like, it really is a trip down, not memory lane, but it's some version of memory lane.
Yeah.
It's you're re-meeting the person you were then.
Right.
When you wrote it.
You remember the emotions that were going on at that time. And that's an interesting comment you make about an audience assuming, write what you know with poetry, whereas if they're reading a murder mystery, they're not going to assume that this actually happened to the author. But it's kind of like songwriting as well, too. Hey, you're singing these lyrics, so this is about you. And a lot of times, no, this is a story, or this actually happened to a bandmate or something like that I just thought was it, or I just completely made it up. And that is true. That is kind of surprising to a reader. And that makes sense that they would just assume that with poetry as well.
Yeah. Poetry has this long history of being, having a speaker. Well, there's epic poetry and there's lyric poetry. So in lyric poetry, there is a speaker, and there's usually the subject matter is usually very emotional. So I think that might be where it comes from. Whereas epic poetry is more kind of like communal, and it's telling the story of the story of history,
Right. Like Canterbury Tales.
Epic. Yeah, Canterbury Tales, sure.
Right.
But in terms of contemporary poetry, it's lyric narrative. So it's stories, but there's a speaker, which can't help but think, oh, it's the poet.
Right.
And then it's on some matter of, it's like an intent, whatever the poet's talking about. Traditionally, in lyric poetry is something that's very intense that they feel they need to communicate, if only to themselves. So,
and then you have a collection, and then that intensity and the emotion connected to that intensity for maybe the hallmark poem of that collection, is it then a thought process where you're like, okay, every poem that I'm putting in this collection has to have the same thread of emotional intensity related to this subject, this feeling. And maybe you have a poem like this. And again, I'm kind of thinking, and maybe this is a naive way of putting it. I'm thinking of like when you're choosing songs for an album, this song doesn't quite, I love this song, but not for this album. Is there that thought process when you're looking at collections?
Yeah, I mean, I remember asking Mark Bibbins, the poet, when I was trying to put together my first collection, like, well, how do I put together a poetry collection? And he gave me an answer like, oh, you just put it together the way it makes sense. I was like,
thanks.
All right. I love Mark, so I'm not,
right.
No shade or anything, but like it's what's interesting is I feel like the advice I would give is some variant of that, right? Because you're looking to make something that is coherent, but you're also looking to have some variation in the register in terms of intensity and emotion. So a mistake I made with the first version of my first book when I put it together was I had a bunch of really super intense poems right next to each other. And it was tiring.
Yeah. You're not giving the reader a break.
Yeah. I felt like, maybe the reader's getting yanked around or feeling like they're being, I don't know, assaulted by my book. And so I tend to think like, okay, I mean, in some ways it is like putting together an album in that like you want a song that leads into another song, that they sort of match well together, but that there's enough of a shift or a change between the two songs that you recognize, yes, this is a different song, and it's telling me something new in the context of this overall project.
Now, how did you recognize with your first collection that problem? I assume it's after the book came out. Were you getting feedback, or you didn't recognize it initially? It sounds like.
Well, I had a number of readers look at the manuscript, and something that I was struck by. So my second book, I didn't have this problem at all, but the first book, whenever I gave it to like 3 different readers who had all published poetry collections and who I considered successful poets, and they all told me it was about different things. So I was like, what do you think I should title it? And my one friend said, she said that she thought the main theme of the book was about loneliness, so I should call it Spinster. And then my other friend said that the book was about environmental destruction, so I should call it like Hurricane, because I had a poem in there that had a hurricane in it. And I was like, okay, so how could
these hurricane? That's great.
Be true in this book, So then I thought I have to arrange the book in a way that is going to give it, some set, like I want the reader to believe that I have a sense of what the book is about, and then I'm going to arrange it in a way so that they can see what I'm trying to do. So I came up with the idea of Barnburner because the sentiment of, there's like the speaker of that book who is, I don't know, maybe you call them self-destructive or going through some self-destructive things, but in fact, they're sort of like a symbol of all of the destruction around them in terms of discord and frustration. I don't know. I was writing sort of this generational stuff there where I was thinking about, how it was hard to be. In 2016, it felt hard to be someone in their 30s who had an uncertain future. It felt really hard,
Yeah, I mean, it was such a hard year anyway, right? And there was just this primordial shift where even if you felt certain on your feet, all of a sudden you're like, everything I thought I knew, I was wrong. And now I don't know how to stand straight without feeling wobbly. And so I think that affects the creative people in a multitude of ways. And there's a lot of interesting work that came out, not only starting in 2016, but then starting in 2020. I know personally, and a lot of writers I know, especially novelists, had this massive yearning, this nostalgic yearning. And we ended up writing, like my book coming out next year takes place in the 80s. Cause I'm like, that's when I was a teenager. That's when I was safe. That's
Right.
I didn't care about the world at large. I only cared about my microcosm of my life, and I was missing that. And I know a lot of writers who kind of went back in
Yeah.
decades.
I have a poem. I have a bunch of poems inspired by the '90s and the events of the '90s in No Spare People. The other thing that appears in that book that is, I would say, is not as prevalent in my first book is the standards that the speaker's trying to use to evaluate the correct course of action for herself is usually somehow there's a removal of all the, like, I wanted to get rid of like all the expectations of what I thought was supposed to happen in my life and what everyone expected me to do. And I was just like, what do I really want to do?
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people went through that at that time where it's just like, as a culture, we were just like, what are we doing? Like,
Right. Why are we working so hard just to get to here?
yeah. So yeah,
Right.
that's totally in the book, especially in terms of, I have a daughter who is 6, who I had with a donor. So,
Mhm.
conceived with IVF, and there's a genetic father, but not a father figure.
And a present. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And that, I mean, part of a lot, I think if anyone, is looking at the book and saying like, does this relate to me? I think if there's anything about your family or anything about your life that made you feel like you didn't fit, or that, you made a choice to live how you wanted to live authentically, and how did that feel? I mean, there's a lot of poems about that.
Well, and that's a pretty universal theme. And also the fear of trying to live the life that you want to live and not knowing the self-doubt, the
Oh yeah.
the nagging realities that keep, bombarding your brain of like, well, you can't do that. You're going to fail. And
I was doing all this contingent work as an academic. So I was adjuncting, and then I was a visiting professor, and like, I was just like, this might not all work out for me.
Right.
I may have had a child, and now I don't know if I can afford for care. So it was, I mean, there's definitely a lot of that in the book. The kind of collision between the dreams you have for yourself and then the reality of like a crappy economy, COVID, like
Like suppressed opportunity.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, totally. And
I know I'm
that's
making it sound like a really fun book, but actually it's uplifting if you want, if the reader wants to see someone else struggle with that and
Right.
try to like kind of actually find a way through it. I think,
right. Right.
because I know I like poetry that does that, I think.
Because you're actively being curious, about a tough situation or a situation that requires real questions. And the reality is most people are very happy to avoid those questions. And that only manifests in just this kind of hardly contained anxiety. But if you're curious about it and like you said, to push through to the other side, that takes a lot of self-reflection, which is very hard, but it can be very cathartic to read anything that allows you to kind of recognize that in yourself and feel like
Yeah.
less alone.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things I've always gone to literature for, or really to the arts, is like kind of this big question stuff. What should I do, and how do I want to live, and how do I be decent?
Yeah.
I think watching films too, like, seeing characters struggle with what the right decision is for them.
Right.
I always love that stuff.
Yeah, totally. Right. Yeah, when it really hits you. And then, so your book is upcoming. Are you, as you've published book after book, are you approaching, I'm just curious about the actual publication process. Now that you've gone through it several times, are you doing anything different? Are you trying to figure out what's the best way for this book to reach an audience? And what did I do last time?
Yeah. It's interesting because someone asked me recently, like I put on a reading series and I do an interview series and I teach poetry and all, I'm sort of like enmeshed in poetry all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so someone asked me, he said, well, are you doing this so that more people will read your book?
Mm.
I was like,
that's pretty cynical.
I mean, I'm like, I guess more people could read my book because of it. He's like, well, do you think your next book will be with a bigger publisher, or do you think you'll be able to? With poetry, there's no money, right? So what you want is a bigger publisher who can promote your book so that you can be more widely read. But I was like, no, I don't even think it's that. I like my publisher. I'm not on a like a conveyor belt of artistic success. I think what matters to me is writing the book, having it come out in a form that makes me proud of it and that I think is consistent with my vision for it. Right. Having a press that is supportive and able to offer some help with promotion, but I do most of it.
Yeah. I mean, that's a universal case.
Yeah.
Almost for 99% of all writers of all types.
Yeah. I mean, that myth of the press that like really goes to bat for their author and sets up a tour and there's all this money and, I'm like, that, I never believed that. I never,
no. I mean, it does exist. It's very rare. But like for every book of mine that comes out, as strong as my PR team is that are in-house with my publisher, I always hire my own PR team to work with them.
Yeah.
Just to give them, even though there's no, measurable return on that, I'm like, I want to give this book the best possible chance of success.
Right.
Yeah. And if I can afford to do that, great. But it's, if there's a book tour, 99% out of 100 times that author is paying for that tour. And maybe the publisher helps setting up the dates, reaching out to booksellers, that kind of a thing, but they're not, I've been put on a book tour before, but for a very limited basis. It's because it's really expensive and publishers aren't drowning in money.
Right. I always try to book things. I do all the booking myself and I try to get things around places where I know I have friends who will come out for one reason, but also so I have somewhere to stay and I try to, so like I'm doing part of a tour in the Northeast because I'm from the Northeast. So I, can those kind of major cities there, and then some dates in Tennessee and Birmingham and New Orleans, places where I do know people, because I don't know. I'm not going to earn any money on this tour. Right. I'm trying not to lose too much money.
Right. You're just hoping more than two people come, and sometimes it's just two people. I've been on. I tell the story a lot. I was flown somewhere to Houston and nobody showed up, not a single person. And my publisher flew me there and I'm like, well, and they promoted it there. I'm like, that's the reality is, people don't typically go out and do those things unless you're a really, really big name. And even then, sometimes that's not a guarantee, but it's all part of the world and you have to, you have to just embrace it. And sometimes it's very thorny and you still have to squeeze hard and get pricked a lot.
Yeah. I mean, putting on poetry events. So I have poets come here to Cookeville for a Sawmill Poetry Series. So that's been going on for about a year. We always have a visiting poet and then we have an open mic. But I still have no idea why some events attract, like we had 45 people at our last event for like a small town in Tennessee at a poetry event. I'm like,
that's fantastic.
I'm like, holy,
that would be a big book launch.
Yeah, no, it was standing room only, but I couldn't figure out why.
Right.
Because I mean, the poet we had was great, but we've had other really equally great poets who have read to 9 or 10 people, people who like flew here or, really kind of sacrificed to get here. And I do all the promotion I can, but I think sometimes it's like the right person maybe sees the event and passes on the information. Right. That's all I can figure out.
It's so organic. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's impossible to
Yeah.
try to reverse engineer that so you can replicate it.
Right. I mean, the good thing is now that with an ongoing series, so we had a lot of really good attendance for September. I've actually seen some people around town who are like, "Hey, when's the next one?" So I really live in a small town, but but that's kind of neat because I think maybe more people will, are at least planning to come. Now that they've been to one event and they liked it.
Right. Right.
Um, but for my own tour, some of them are parts of series, but some are events that I just set up myself.
Yeah.
Those I'm more nervous about.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you consider yourself an introvert by nature?
That's a good question. I'm whatever that thing is where I can be really extroverted, but then I'm like really exhausted
Right. Right.
for like
Yeah.
24 hours.
Yep.
Yeah.
I heard it, Greg, because I always kind of thought I was an extrovert. And then I heard a definition once and they said, think of it this way. If you're driving home in the afternoon, you've had a long day and your choices are either to go out with friends and unwind or to just hang out at home. I'm like, I would totally prefer to hang out at home. I'm like, I guess maybe I'm a closeted introvert because I'm the same way. It's like I can be very dynamic and social, and then I just want to hide.
Yeah. I probably gained some of my apparently extrovert qualities, although I don't think I'm an extrovert because I worked in public relations for a while when I was doing the marketing work. And so I had to go talk to people. It was literally my job.
Oh, and teaching.
Yeah. Yeah. It helped me with teaching, or teaching helps me with that as well.
Yeah.
It does help you be able to think on your feet. But yeah, I probably, in terms of, there's social interactions that can be relaxing and nice, such as being with friends, but meeting a bunch of people you don't know,
Right.
never like, that's never going to be relaxing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. So doing interviews is always a little bit like, oh God, I got to talk to this guy now.
No, well, you're really easy to talk to.
That's good. Well, we haven't even gone to the hard part yet, which is actually coming up now, if you're up for it.
Oh, okay.
So this is the making it up part of the show where I've selected 3 books kind of at random. I took them all from the same section on my bookshelf. I'm going to have you choose one of those books, and we're going to choose a random page and a random sentence. I'm going to read that sentence. And then we're just going to do like maybe a 2-minute long short story, poem, whatever we want to do. I'll read the first sentence, then you give me a sentence or two. I'll do a sentence or two, and then we'll call it a day. So this is actually a fun section of my bookshelf. Some of my favorites. I've got The Princess Bride.
Oh, okay.
Oh, geez. I love its cover. And I think this is actually my high school version of The Catcher in the Rye.
I remember that version.
That red cover.
Yeah.
This was, so it was probably 1986 that I probably read that. And this is actually perhaps my favorite book of all time, McCarthy's The Road.
Yeah.
I remember reading The Road and I didn't know you couldn't write like that. I didn't know A, it was allowed, and B, it was possible. And I'm like, how? And I remember reading paragraphs and just being so distracted that I had to go back and deconstruct, like, what does this mean? And secondly, where's the verb? It was just, but it somehow it all worked, and I was blown away by it. So
he's a collaborative writer.
Totally. So choose one of those books.
Oh, you want me to choose?
Oh yeah, you got to choose one of those.
Oh boy. I'm intimidated by McCarthy. I mean, I should be intimidated by all of them, but let's do The Princess Bride.
Good call. So give me a number between 1 and 283. Such a short book. I didn't realize that.
64.
I'm going to quickly scan. Yeah, it's the first page of a chapter. I'm going to quickly scan and find. All right, this is this is a very simple sentence. So I'm going to read the sentence, and then you do whatever you want with it. Queen Bella was shaped like a gumdrop.
She was always searching for the perfect dress to wear, but nobody made gumdrop-shaped dresses.
So she had to go to town and have one specially made. And fortunately, there was a new dress shop that she had never been to. When she walked inside, she was immediately called out by the man behind the counter.
Bella said, I haven't seen you for at least 5 years. I didn't know you still lived in New Hampshire.
The man looked at her up and down and said, I hadn't realized you would become queen. What? I have the perfect dress for you, but you have to follow me into the back of the store because it's something that I don't show anyone ever.
Bella wondered whether it was the right thing to do to go into a back room in a strange store with a strange man. Then again, why not? Why not make the day interesting? So she walks back and they come to a door that for some reason is only 4 feet tall. So she has to stoop down and he has to stoop down and they get into it. It's like a little closet or something. And then he finds a box and he says, this is what I want to show you. But you have to close your eyes first. And now she's really kind of freaking out because strange store, strange man, tiny room, weird box, closing her eyes. What could happen?
He hands her the box and tells her to hold it while he opens it. She reluctantly closes her eyes, but a promise is a promise, and she even fights her impulse to squint just a little bit so she could let a little light in and just have some kind of bearing. She's proud of herself for a moment, and that's when she feels the box start to shake in her hands. There was something inside.
Could it be a mouse? Could it be an alarm clock? Could it be a stopwatch? Could it be a bird? And right when she thinks that, the box bursts open and out comes a magpie. Kind of a huge bird, actually, which was why the box was shaking so much. She said, why do you want to show me this?
I think we call it there. That's lovely. The magpie in the box.
Yeah.
That's so now that's not a poem, that's a story. Or is that a poem?
I mean, you
too
don't
much
be
structure.
putting birds in poems.
Oh. Is that like
well, you don't have to be careful. I mean, it's just a thing that poets are like, a bird in a poem, you know.
Oh, is that a thing? Like that's like a trope?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, like the bird that appears like a symbol out of nowhere and like brings the poem together. So you have to be
right.
I mean, you can use a bird in a poem, but I just actually threw I threw a wild card bird into our story. So I guess.
Huh. So like the raven kind of started that whole trope?
I don't know. Well, birds all have their symbolism, right?
Totally.
Like owls and eagles and hawks and any bird you can think of has starlings.
Yeah.
Any symbolism associated.
Totally.
And birds are so weird and mysterious too. It's like, now you look at them and their eyes are all like moving around. You're like, what is happening?
Right. They're very twitchy.
For you.
What are you trying to tell me?
Yeah. And they're like former dinosaurs too. So
right.
Yeah. Gotta really watch it.
Well, Erin, what a pleasure. spending some time with you today, and congratulations on your upcoming release. That's so exciting. You must be thrilled and nervous about it at the same time.
That's the best kind of feeling. Yeah, I am.
It is.
Thrilled and nervous.
Awesome.
Thank you
Well,
so
listen,
much.
I hope I get to meet you sometime.
Yeah, that would be cool.
All right. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Yep. Bye.
Bye. So that's it. That is my conversation with Erin Hoover. And we ended with the magpie coming out of a box. And who knows what the symbolism of that is. So if you want to look that up and shoot me a message and tell me if we are foretelling some kind of catastrophic event because we had a magpie in a box in our story, please let me know. If you want to find out more about Erin and go buy her upcoming book, No Spare People, I encourage you to go to her website, which is simply erinhooverpoet.com. While you're at it, hop on over to carterwilson.com and you can sign up for my newsletter, check out my appearances, buy my books, or just get a hold of me and say hey, because, that's always kind of nice. So that's it for now. More episodes of Making It Up coming out soon. As always, I appreciate you watching and or listening. Enjoy your week, everybody. Bye.